I've really been looking forward to our next session. Mike Schober and Bala Mukund from Charles Schwab were speakers at our New York event a couple of years ago. And I can sort of remember there was almost an audible intake of breath in the room when they talked about the savings they'd achieved by rolling out test automation at in the robo-advisory business of Charles Schwab. And a couple of years on, they're now doing this across the entire wealth management business of Schwab at an enterprise level. So I'll hand over to Bala and Mike to tell you a little bit more about themselves and tell that story themselves. Bala, Mike, welcome.
Our overall goal was to basically create an enterprise software development practice that is scalable, frictionless, that reduces friction between teams and within a team, and is repeatable across an enterprise. So we started this in Q4 of 2017 on the Intelligent Portfolios team, which Bala is still a part of. I've actually moved to a new enterprise level organization where we're actually taking this practice and working at bringing it across the enterprise at Schwab in various forms. From a learning perspective, and we'll kind of jump forward to what it actually is, it's a lot different to do something like this at a team level as compared to an enterprise level. But the enterprise level savings, as Matthew mentioned, we'll talk about later, are pretty large. And this isn't something that is really focused on just Charles Schwab. There's subsequent research that I've done in the industry, and we've talked about this before, where this is actually an overall industry trend in terms of how you organize teams and deliver quality and automate basically everything. So Bala, anything you want to add to the intro?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll kind of like introduce myself as well. Like Mike said, I belong to the wealth management technology team in Charles Schwab, predominantly dealing with robo-advice as a platform where we essentially democratize investing within the larger investment pool that we have. We don't idealize only people with wealth. We essentially want everybody to be part of the investment profile. As a part of that, our application is essentially a $40 billion AUM application. Many of you might have heard it. It's called Schwab Intelligent Portfolios. But the application set aside, what we've done and what we've achieved in the last 2.5 years, has changed the dynamic of how we approach software development as a practice. And like Mike said, we'll talk some numbers and things like that. But overall, it has been extremely positive. The narrative within the team is very different from what it was 2 years before, where we had processes that were sort of archaic, if you will. Now, I mean, albeit we are not there yet to the promised land, there is still more work to be done, but we are further along the road in comparison to other teams, even within Schwab. And that's one of the things Mike will have a lot of insight into, is how this can scale for Schwab as a whole and beyond. Because since his move to the strategic, the organization, there is a different perspective to what we've done. You start small, you grow big, you learn from what you've done, and then you essentially evaluate across the organization. And then obviously with that comes gain in efficiency, savings, and so on and so forth.
And to add to that, one of our key partners in this process, Emphasis, one of our key vendors in Intelligent Portfolios and for Schwab, has actually, and they were a key partner, has actually taken what we've done with Intelligent Portfolios and created a practice in their firm to take to the enterprise, or to take to the industry. So they're actually, Emphasis is actually taking this process out to the industry.
Cool. And we'll talk some top numbers here right out of the bat, what we've done and what we've achieved. This might be slightly, the numbers might be slightly lower because we've actually furthered along the road, but we want to be conservative in how we approach this. So we've essentially reduced cost by 30%, and we'll talk more how. We've improved throughput. I mean, and throughput, how we've measured is essentially we use, we go through sprint cycles, we have story pointing, so on and so forth. We've also evaluated the number of bugs that we create in production. And Mike, you can define what a bug is once I complete this slide. And then we've achieved faster automation. I mean, we've introduced a lot of these standards within automation within our CI/CD pipeline. There's a lot of rejection if a certain quality threshold is not met. So for example, unit test coverage. I mean, we've said we'll have a gold standard for artifact A. And if we achieve gold standard, that means we have 80% coverage. And our CI/CD automatically has blockers that if you go lower than 80%, there is no build to be had. PRs are evaluated that right with automation. I mean, you still have a manual component to it, but before a PR, a pull request gets to a developer, there is automation to evaluate whether it's even worthy enough of someone taking a look at it. So we do security scans, we do coverage scans, we do BDD scans, so on and so forth. Schwab, as you might understand, is a very large organization with a lot of oversight from not only within Schwab, but from regulators. So our deployments have to be extremely stringent. We can't be a little flippant about let's put it in prod and figure it out kind of a thing, because there are a lot of ramifications with respect to legal aspects to what we deploy out there. In the past, we used to deploy once a month. Today, we deploy nearly 6 times a month. We were doing 4 times when this slide was put in place, but we've actually upped the ante, and we are actually going at 6 to 8. To a lot of customers, or to people, maybe if they're from Google or Amazon, they might say, okay, this is nothing really to scoff about, but it is still a challenge for a company the size of Schwab in the financial space.
Yeah, to Bala's point about a bug. So for us, a bug is only a bug if it's found in production or UAT. There's no such thing as a bug during the development phase, because the teams that have been built here are all engineers. There's no QA. So what we achieved in Q1 of 2018 was the reduction of 50% of our team, which was about 50-50 QA development. We reduced the team by about 50% and eliminated the QA role. So not just manual QA, but QA automation. So in this model, development does everything along with the POs. And to add on to that slide, so this is just the team savings that we had for this team. By making this change, we saved about 3.15 million and had a 20% net productivity gain. After reinvestment for tools, we had about 2.37 in net savings that can be reinvested in the business and in developing new features for intelligent portfolios. Now, there's a whole different picture when you look at it at the enterprise level. We'll talk about that later. And just to start off with a quote from the recent Forrester Tech Tide, I did a position paper on this regarding continuous software delivery in Q4 2019. Forrester is saying that firms that stick with passe manual testing will fall behind. So as we talk through this, you'll see how we did this about 2.5 years ago. It continues with the team, and it's continuing to get even more efficient with the adoption and rollout of some more efficient tooling in terms of intelligent automation. We'll talk about that as we go through the slides.
Sure. And thanks, Mike. And the part that the path that we embarked upon 2 years was not just about essentially saying we don't need manual QA. That in isolation does not solve the problem. You need to essentially target 3 areas. You need to have proper engineering methodologies and appropriate tooling, because you can't replace a manual component with another manual component. That's not going to scale, and probably you will not have a happy company at that point. And in addition, we also established processes. We said, we are not going to be this waterfall kind of methodology. We're not going to adopt a waterfall kind of methodology where there is development, and then the development hands over to QA, then QA signs off, then it goes into, say, release management, so on and so forth, because that's extremely inefficient. And there is a case of pointing fingers, as you all may have already noticed. Like throwing it over the wall generally doesn't provide any addition to quality practices. And the next part is organization. You have to, when you eliminate or when you think of replacing people with a different skill set, you need to create that organization around it where there is a sense of ownership. In the past, with these over-the-wall approaches, the sense of ownership was lost, where it was more a case of, well, it was not my mistake because QA missed it, or QA was not my mistake because development missed it. We've kind of removed that element today because everybody is responsible for what they do. If there is a problem in production, there is no pointing fingers. It comes back to the team.
And there's an industry stat that we learned from one of our vendors as we were initially kicking this off. It's about bugs, which is one of my favorite topics. But if you think about it, in a traditional model where you have QA and development and the POs, when development finishes their development, they hand it off to QA. Logically, they don't do as much quality checking because they believe that there's another group there to catch it. So once QA gets the code, they find a bug. They go through the process. Somehow the bug makes it back over to a developer. Developer says, not a bug. QA says, yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Let's call the PO. PO comes in and says, it's a bug. And then it finds its way to a developer to start fixing it. So that whole process, on average, in the industry takes about an hour just to discover that something's a bug, going between teams and with all the friction. Imagine if you have 100 bugs in a release. That's a lot of time lost. Now, a developer that is doing the development, doing the unit testing, and doing their automation, and then when they go to do a pull request, they run all their automation, because we're treating automation just the same as if it were feature code. When a developer finds a bug, no developer is going to log a bug on themselves. That is not even logical. So that whole hour of wasted time is gone. The developer will just fix the bug and move on. And we found this to be true in February 2018 when the development team literally, without QA, finished their release cycle, and we were doing less than 4 a month. They finished it 10 days early. And the bottom line was that the friction was gone. They were fixing bugs, they were releasing, they had less issues in production. So the reduction of friction by combining the teams and eliminating certain types of roles really does make a difference when you're developing software.
So in that same vein, I mean, like we were mentioning, the traditional route is, you go through this entire waterfall mechanism. You go from step 1, step 2, step 3, and then each one provides a sign off. Some provide conditional sign off, which we don't understand what that means, because if you're not responsible for what you've signed off, why even bother signing off? So that's another aspect that we've kind of discussed. But the transformational part is where we'll focus on. So we've created a team just of developers. They are responsible for every aspect of software delivery, from development to virtualization to performance testing to deployment, so on and so forth. So they are an autonomous team who are fully responsible and engaged on different aspects. So when there is a problem, you don't have to find the appropriate team that performed this task. You just find that team that did everything. So, and they are intrinsic to the entire practice. They know every aspect of it. So if they failed on something, it's easier for them to figure out how to fix it as opposed to trying to parlay this between teams. So today, within the intelligent portfolios application development team, we only have Scrum teams that comprise of engineers. And Mike, we've been using Mabel a lot. And actually there is a metric that we gathered. So when we wrote BDD manually, it took a week. When we started using Mabel, it took a day. So we'll also talk about some of the tools we've introduced that has improved efficiency at a scale that we couldn't have imagined when we started this 2 years ago.
So Bala, to that point, I do know about that. So there was always a strategic view on intelligent portfolios to move from handcrafted automation, which basically just takes what a person does manually and translates it to software. The strategic view is always to go to intelligent automation, which does save time because it's not handcrafted anymore. And the shift in intelligent portfolios, that was one of the things I was going to mention, is moving from handcrafted automation, which was what we had back 2.5 years ago, to what is here today as intelligent automation. And it has saved, I think, intelligent portfolios. The number I've heard is 80 to 85% of the automation timeframe has been reduced. Yes. And this is a big subject in the Capgemini Sogeti World Quality Report 2019-2020, which I've recently read, and I encourage people to take a look at. There's a major shift in the industry from handcrafted type of legacy automation to intelligent automation, and Mabel is square in the middle of that.
Absolutely. And we won't go through each part, but these might be self-evident, but a lot of teams don't follow this. They still continue to use feature branches. They get an Excel sheet of, let me figure out what are the test scenarios that I have to document, and then put a checkbox whether this passed, this failed. we don't deal with that anymore. We effectively have BDD. So it starts from the PO. PO provides the gherkin. The teams develop the BDD. And with Mabel, you don't really need to develop the BDD. You can effectively just, with a flip of few clicks, you can actually automate your process. And the nice part about it is it's repeatable. And even the better part about it is it's not a technology-driven solution. It's more like you don't have to be a developer to run that solution. You can be a PO, you can be a BSA, or you can be a developer. So there are different actors who can especially execute on those things without the need for developer interaction or assistance. So the POs have also enjoyed creating these automation without the need for additional help.
And we have taken Mabel to my team at the enterprise level, and we are seeing adoption and interest at the PO level, developer level, even traditional QA. It makes, if you still have those teams, it makes the automation that comes out of those teams, because they're traditionally not developers or not SDETs, makes their automation more efficient. So the tooling that's out there really is revolutionizing the way that quality is being conducted across the development lifecycle.
I'll just touch upon this self-healing reliability that we've essentially done some research on that in terms of POCs, is our ability to turn off features in production based on our logging metrics. So we have actually introduced some of that in areas we feel are more prone to such items, because I mean, again, like we said, we are bound by regulations, so we really don't want to change production environments without a proper change management process. That is just still a legacy way of approaching things. But on items we feel are not extremely detrimental to that process, we have introduced self-healing and alerting and many other ways to essentially turn a feature off if it's bleeding a lot of errors. So we've introduced that. We thought as a pipe dream, but actually we've made some progress on that.
And on that point, Bala, there's beyond that, at the enterprise level, we're looking at capabilities with tools like Harness that do CD/CV, so continuous delivery, continuous verification. That really, and you know, I'm kind of on the role of eliminating roles, but as we roll out these types of capabilities, you can eliminate with tools like Harness, release management, and audit functions, and change management functions. So all of that can be completely automated into production, and full rollbacks if there's errors, as Bala was mentioning. So Harness is more like a brute force. Stuff like Launch Darkly is more surgical. But we're pulling those capabilities out at the enterprise level at Schwab, which will have major positive ramifications on how the organization operates.
So in a few slides before, we talked about the tasks that the team performs. This is essentially the team itself. So in the past we had these silo teams like developer, quality, operations, change management, release management, you name it, you got it. But today we have essentially said all of these three. The only outlier, but like Mike was mentioning with Harness, we might even blur that gap with respect to change management and release management. Today, it is still somewhat of a manual process where you need these ticketing system and approvals and so on and so forth, but that can be put into a workflow. It doesn't really have to be email chains and so on and so forth. So today we don't have developers, QAs, and operations as individual team members. They are part of one team ecosystem where they perform all tasks. So everybody has a fair understanding of what each task entails. Of course, there are SMEs within each task. I mean, not to say that every developer has a very good understanding of how to perform deployment versus how to perform performance scaling and so on and so forth. But if you comprise a team with all those nuts and bolts, you get this one team that is fully owned and responsible for the code that they write and deploy to production. So that makes them feel closer to the actual customer, as opposed to 3 layers deep. When a customer calls and says, I have a problem, it goes into like a bucket, then somebody passes the paper along. It doesn't feel that way anymore. They are directly interacting with the customer if they have to.
It essentially creates a full ownership model within the team. There's no passing the buck between the teams. And as Bala mentioned earlier, finger pointing, everybody has full ownership. Developers, BSAs, and in this context, and POs.
And this is essentially some of the tools that we have introduced at different phases of the entire engineering lifecycle. I mean, we won't go deep into each tool, but some of the tools that we've kind of talked about is data virtualization. It's a big topic, and I'm sure that bales and bales of papers have been written on that topic. And we are going through that as we speak. And we've engaged with Delphix, we've engaged with other partners to essentially identify how we can improve our virtualization capabilities with respect to data. Everybody understands how to virtualize an API, use Wiremark, use other tools. It's not complicated, but data virtualization is not something that is easily achievable in a large organization like Schwab, where we have 30 to 40 domains that own their own data, and I'm being very, very conservative here. And we interact with a lot of these domains because we are at the tip of the interaction with respect to software. Every data element behind that software is actually rendered through other domains within Schwab. So our ability to test end-to-end through automation is reliant on that data being available end-to-end. Mike, do you have any other tools that you want to add to that you think might be relevant for this conversation?
No, I think we do have a big installed footprint of Sauce Labs, which is basically a Selenium grid. So that's a big installed enterprise level group of teams leveraging that. There is a movement towards Mabel because it is more intelligent, and as intelligent portfolios has found, it really increases the productivity of creating automation at the developer level, but also allows for other personas to use that tool to automate UAT, automate other capabilities, SRE for production support and monitoring, et cetera. So we're moving more firmly in that direction.
Cool. So this is what we are looking at Transform. So we came from something that was, so to speak, archaic in our parlance, but today we do have things that have moved forward. Like I said, I mean, there are still gaps that we need to fill, but in every sphere of this diagram, we have achieved notable progress. So when we talk about virtualization, we have achieved API virtualization. And Mike, if you want to talk about that anecdote with respect to how developers engineered themselves out of a problem with virtualization, feel free to add to that.
Yeah, and that one is pretty funny. So when QA was removed from the picture in Q1 of 2018, they were using some older tools to attempt to do virtualization. Developers didn't want to deal with service issues of downstream or upstream systems. So one of our developers basically built an automated simulation hub in about a week or so of time on his own on the side to automatically virtualize all services that were hit during an automation run. And that was literally an innovative move by the development team and one developer because they simply didn't want to deal with all the problems of services not working. So by changing the way the team worked, it actually opened the door to innovation, where before the development teams felt like they had to go to the traditional QA team or POs and ask for permission or have them do the work. Once you remove that barrier, they were free to innovate, and they've continuously done that, since the 2018 timeframe. So, I mean, I'm seeing that now across the enterprise in other areas, like our cloud delivery group, our cross-enterprise group that's doing harness. So once you lift the barrier across the enterprise, you start to see this type of innovation occurring. And then I think we're getting short on our time, but we talked about the savings SIP had. That was about 3.1 million and a 20% net productivity gain. If we look at the enterprise, and Matthew, the numbers are a little lower because our QA has been shrinking in the last couple of years, but 2 years ago, the QA footprint for Schwab was a staggering, this is human capital, $100 million. So today, it's 87 million. It has shrunk, but by all projections, if we were to follow the same model at the enterprise level, and we've been talking about it at the enterprise level, there's a number of resource initiatives that we're plugging this into. You could have a net savings if you go through this process after reinvestment of about 18 million of around $69 million. And if you just get conservative and take 20% of that, you can save the enterprise $14 million just off the top by making a change like this. And we're not saying you can do it in all groups. The overall concepts, they fit everywhere. They fit in mobile, they fit in web, they fit in services, they fit with mainframe. People might say this is more modern, but it fits with mainframe. It's just different tools.
Right.
But there are certain areas where if you look across the enterprise, you wouldn't do it as fast as we did it in a quarter. You would stretch it out a little longer because of the ramification and the risk factor across the enterprise. But for an $87 million human capital QA footprint, a $69 million savings after reinvestment is pretty large. And you can dial that down just to be risk averse at a financial institution like Schwab, which is what we would do. But it's staggering. I mean, we are seeing that trends across the industry, according to Capgemini and Sogeti. One key thing on budgets is the share of the IT budget allocated to QA and testing has been falling year over year for at least 4 years. So this is a trend that is occurring across the entire industry and all sectors of the industry, not just FI, but automotive, retail, everywhere. So it is something that's really occurring across the industry and is going to continue, I believe, to accelerate.
Thanks for that. So overall, I mean, essentially to kind of close the presentation, what we are trying to do is cost is only one factor. Obviously, it's an important factor, but mitigating risk is the key factor that we go after. Is essentially saying that we know that software will have bugs. There is no software that does not have bugs. But how quickly we recover from that bug when we are in production that allows us to serve our clients better is the important aspect in this, like whether it's self-healing, whether it's through automation, whether it's through logging, you name it, but that's the part. And obviously, once you improve efficiency, you can present your clients with new features quicker, and that obviously will delight your customers. So overall, it aligns with every facet of what every company wants to achieve, and effectively deliver software in a manner that's befitting to the company, the quality, health, and performance.
Yep.
Matthew, thank you for allowing us to be part of this one.
Thank you.
We have some questions. We've got 5 minutes for questions. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. We've got lots of questions to get through. I've got some specific detailed ones, quick fire ones, then a couple of big ones. So let me just jump straight in. Guillermo wants to know, and somebody else wants to know, how big are these Scrum teams, these teams that you reformed? How many people were in them? That seems.
Sure, Mike. I mean, feel free to add to this one. We started with about 10 Scrum teams. So we had 10 Scrum teams, mm-hmm. and they all had a, give or take, a 30% QA component. And effectively, of the 10 Scrum teams, we don't have that 30%. So if you just drop 30% off of 10, you're left with 7. Now, if you look at the 30% drop, you've increased productivity by 20%. So what we used to do with 10, we do way better with 7. And again, okay. I'm just talking purely from the intelligent portfolio standpoint, but yeah. Mike can speak to a larger.
I would see across the enterprise, teams are converting a portion of their QAs into SDETs.
Okay.
So they're doing that across the enterprise. Now, from a Schwab enterprise level perspective, the numbers that I quoted, there's 1,079 manual QAs across the enterprise. So it's a pretty large footprint, but for intelligent portfolios, it was a roughly 30 to 50% drop in staffing okay. when we went through this change.
Okay. Brian would like to know, what do you and your developers think of codeless tools like Mabel? Have you seen pushback on codeless solutions?
No, there's actually a lot of adoption of codeless. Yeah. It's not the old school codeless where it's really just generating some flaky code. It's got to be intelligent codeless, like okay. Mabel. So that's the key thing. But there's a lot of adoption. Mabel has actually changed their focus. They were originally focusing around QA. They've added personas recently in a recent release for developers, for okay. BSPOs.
What do you think of API testing? What do you use for API testing? Not what do you think of it, what do you use for it?
So at this point, we essentially use BDD for API testing as well. Okay. I mean, we are just purely talking just code okay. testing. Of course, we have tools for performance and security and all of that stuff, but we use SpecFlow for BDD, not Spectro for unit testing, but Spectro for BDD to perform API testing.
Okay.
And we run through CI/CD. We are Open API 3.0 compliant. We are design first compliant. We are Swagger compliant. So Origin compliant. So there is a whole lot of API work that happens as a part of the testing.
Okay. And this is the big question. It's one I wanted to ask, because of course, Charles Schwab has acquired TD Ameritrade. There are lots of changes in your industry, the retail brokerage and wealth industry. Robinhood has changed things. Schwab has pioneered a subscription model. And so you have to adapt to this. And we did have a question from somebody who was saying, who is a Schwab alumni, says it's great to see the enormous strides you guys are making. They are fortunate in bringing new techniques and industry cutting edge technologies to a new application platform. But without rewriting applications to a modern stack, how do you plan to roll this out to other areas in the organization? Of course, as Charles Schwab grows, the challenge grows, right?
Yes.
So
Mike, you want to start there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So at the enterprise level, there's an app modernization effort that's going on right now. So there are going to be a lot of apps that are rewritten and or reworked and moved to more modern platforms like IaaS and PaaS, Pivotal for on-prem or GCP for cloud. So Schwab as an enterprise is undergoing a major transformation through application modernization. This is a really good cross-section into that. So that's how you roll out new techniques like more automation, things like CD/CV into the pipeline as the applications modernize. Granted, some will take a lot longer. There are some that are very legacy and core, but they're all on timelines to modernize.
Okay, we have to end it there. But thank you so much. Thank you for joining us from the US.